have been great champions and supporters. Thank you as well to our media partner, NBC Universal News Group. They've been terrific to work with, and we especially appreciate their help in growing our digital audience. To the small but mighty Aspen Ideas Health and Festival teams and all the people who work tirelessly behind the scenes to bring this event to life, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the best. And finally, and most importantly, a heartfelt thanks to every one of you for tuning in, for Zooming in over the past 3 days. Your enthusiasm for and feedback about the program has been most gratifying and most valuable. It will all help to make Aspen Ideas Health 2022 better than ever. We expect to be back on our beautiful campus in Aspen for that event, meeting in person, and hope to see you there. Until then, be well, stay safe. Let me now turn things over to your host for today's program, NBC's senior medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres.
Thank you, Ruth, and welcome back to the final day of Aspen Ideas Health 2021, presented by the Aspen Institute in partnership with NBC Universal News Group. Today's session looks at what lies ahead in finally containing the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of building resilience in kids, and the strength it takes to overcome serious illness and rejoin the world of the healthy. We will also take our final deep dive, including audience Q&A at 4 p.m. Eastern. Join author and surgeon Atul Gawande and Chief Health Officer at Google Health, Karen DeSalvo, to discuss the future of medicine and healthcare in a post-COVID world. It promises to be a far-reaching and incredible conversation. But first up on the program today, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the NIH. Dr. Fauci has become a household name during the pandemic and is considered the most trusted source for reliable health information for all things COVID-related. My colleague, NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt, sits down with Dr. Fauci to discuss the progress we've made and the challenges we still face in the fight against COVID-19. And as you'll see, we've invited some special guests to help me introduce Dr. Fauci.
Who is Dr. Fauci?
A guy on TV. He's a doctor. A doctor? A man? He is a doctor. He finds viruses. He's a person. And he's a motivational speaker. He gives vaccines. Because he still makes people better.
Hello, I'm Lester Holt, anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News, and this session is being streamed as part of NBC Universal News Group's partnership with Aspen Ideas Health. Today's session, from variants to vaccinations, an update on the pandemic with America's COVID-19 Dr. Fauci. I'm excited to welcome him here. It's great to see you. Thank you for taking the time for us.
Thank you very much, Lester. It's good to be with you.
I want to kind of back up and do an overview of where we are and where we're going. When this thing first happened, it was all about flattening the curve. We were all doing what we had to do to flatten the curve, and we talked about mitigation, and then came the vaccinations, obviously. And I think if you ask most Americans what their goal is, it's to be done with this, to be, done with COVID and get our lives back to normal. From a public health perspective, what do you see now as the realistic goals at this point?
Well, the realistic goal is to get enough people vaccinated so that you see a really rather sharp diminution in the viral dynamics. We're doing extremely well in the rollout of vaccines. I mean, if you look at the numbers, we have a third of the adult population is fully vaccinated. More than 50% of the adult population has received at least one dose. Importantly, when you look at seniors, about 80% or more of seniors greater than 65 years old have received at least one dose, and 65% of them are fully vaccinated. The results are obvious. The hospitalizations and deaths among the elderly group have gone down between 75 and 80%. That's the good news. The situation that's still challenging is that even with that, we still have not yet seen the kind of dip in daily infections. We've reached, we flattened the curve, Lester, but we flattened it at a level that's unacceptably high. we have a 7-day average of new infections of about 60,000 per day. We've got to get it remarkably below that. And I think we will be there because we are probably right at that turning point, that crossroads, where the people who are getting vaccinated, if you look at it sort of metaphorically as a race between the vaccine and the virus, which if left to its own devices will bounce back up, that as more and more people get vaccinated every day, 3 million people a day, given the amount that I just mentioned have already been vaccinated, we should start to see a sharp downward slope of that curve. And when we do, then we could start talking about gradually progressing more and more towards what we would like to see as normality, or as you said a moment ago, to get this over with. That's going to take months to do, but I think we're clearly on that pathway to do it.
The term we keep hearing is herd immunity. Are we overusing that phrase? Is that the technical goal?
Yeah. You know, Lester, I believe that we've overused it because it is an elusive term right now, because we don't know exactly what that number is. Classically, the protection that you get in the community is a combination of the number of people that are vaccinated and the number of people who've been infected, recovered, and are protected against subsequent infection with the same pathogen. The reason why we have moving targets here are severalfold. One, we don't know what that magical number is. We know what it is for measles because we've had decades of experience with measles. But the moving target about this is that we don't know what the duration of the protection is from someone who maybe got infected 9 months ago or so. The other thing that's a wild card in this is variants, namely infections that are the same coronavirus with a mutation that makes it a little bit different, that may make a person who is either vaccinated or having been already infected not as well protected as you would have hoped. So all of these moving things make this elusive number of herd immunity really kind of difficult to define. However, the one thing we do know, putting aside this concept of herd immunity, is that the more people you get vaccinated, every single day, about 3 million people get vaccinated, you get closer and closer to the control of the viral dynamics. That's absolutely certain. We may not know what that magical number is, but whatever it is, you're getting closer and closer to it as you get more and more people vaccinated.
On the good news front is we clearly seem to see that there's the real world evidence the vaccines is that they are working, and they're working in a very robust kind of a way. But we keep hearing we only know they're good for 6 months. I got my shots in March, so I'm looking at the fall, not knowing what my status is going to be. Are we going to get more clarity on that as to how long these shots last?
Yeah, we've got to be careful how people interpret that data. Let me explain. When you look 6 months out, you find out that you still have durability of immunity. So we know that it is at least 6 months. How far out, we don't know. I mean, you ask a very good question. Does that mean you need to get a boost in the fall? Not necessarily at all. It means we need to continue to follow people. And we know now what a correlative immunity is. There are certain laboratory tests that if they stay up at a high level and then start to slope down, we know when they go below a certain critical level, you become more susceptible upon exposure to getting infected. Right now, we know that's clearly firm until 6 months. We don't know whether it's going to be firm till a year or more. So we're preparing for the eventuality that we might need to boost people. And I think that's an entirely conceivable issue there, Lester. I do believe that sooner or later we likely will need a boost. When that will be, we don't know. But right now, we're preparing that we may need a boost, either because of the durability of the protection or if variants come up that make the vaccine efficacy a little bit less. And these are all things we're eminently preparing for.
There is, of course, the human nature part of all this, and we're beginning to see that in terms of that second dose. There's some evidence that a lot of people are not coming back for that second dose. Is that alarming, worrisome? How would you characterize that?
Well, it is of some concern. You'd like to see 100% of people. But if you look at the history of vaccines in which there are more than one dose, vaccines like the shingles vaccine, which require a couple of doses, or the hepatitis B vaccine, you find out that just human nature alone, there's going to be a certain proportion of people who are just for one reason or other not going to come back for the second dose. That's just part of human nature. It's about 8% now, I believe, for the SARS-CoV-2. That's even less than the percent that don't come back for the shingles vaccine. So what we need to do is make sure that it doesn't get any more than that, and by continuing to outreach to people to impress upon them how much better 2 doses is than 1 dose. And I think people need to understand that there really is a significant difference in the degree of protection with a second dose versus just the first dose.
There's been a lot made of vaccine hesitancy. In terms of what we're seeing, is it any different than what you would expect in what you were talking about in December when the vaccines first hit the market?
I think it's a little bit better, particularly, I believe, among the minority populations, Lester, because we've really put a considerable effort to get out there and get people at the community level to speak for the importance of getting vaccinated. And if you look at the percentage, particularly among African Americans and Hispanics who were hesitant to get vaccinated, that has gone down, the percentage of hesitancy. Unfortunately, there's a degree of hesitancy among others that is either at that level that we want to bring it down, but it isn't coming down. And that's the reason why we have a lot of effort going into what we call the COVID-19 community core, of calling upon trusted messengers in society. They could be sports figures, entertainment figures, and importantly, clergy, to get out and talk to people in the community and try and explain why it's important for their own health, for that of their family, and for that of the community to get vaccinated. So we got to keep pushing that envelope all the way.
And we talked a moment ago about the folks who are not getting that second shot, which brings us back to Johnson & Johnson, a single-dose vaccine. We know about the setback recently with those cases of blood clots. Do you think the fact, though, that it is a single shot, will that make people feel better? Or do you think we'll get past this negative news about that J&J vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a pause, there are going to be some people that I say, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? But what we need to, and I believe we've done it pretty well, is articulate that this was an exceptionally rare adverse event. And yet the CDC and the FDA called a temporary pause to more carefully examine the data and to alert physicians about what to do if you actually see someone that has this complication, to treat them appropriately. Now that it's been re-examined, it's been confirmed that it is an exceedingly rare adverse event. So now we're going to be back on track. This particular product is going to be now available for people. And yet, you're right, there are a lot of people who really feel they'd rather have a single-dose vaccine than a double-dose vaccine. So I believe we're going to start to see people getting back in line to receive J&J, just as people are enthusiastic about receiving the Moderna or the Pfizer product.
The CDC guidelines with reference to those who are fully vaccinated are still somewhat limiting, especially for folks who think, hey, I got these shots and I should be able to resume normal life. Do you see those restrictions being changed or lifted in some way in the coming weeks?
The answer is an absolute yes. We've already seen the CDC come out with guidelines of what people who are vaccinated can do within the home. You heard that a few weeks ago, that if you're with vaccinated people and even unvaccinated people in the setting of the home, you don't have to wear a mask. You can have physical contact. Grandma can hug her granddaughter, and grandpa can hug a grandson and all that sort of thing, which is good. We've also heard that it is much safer to be able to travel if you're vaccinated. You know, traveling in crowded places is still not recommended, but if you're vaccinated, the risk is remarkably lower. You're going to be hearing little by little coming out guidelines from the CDC about the kinds of restrictions that are being pulled back now that we have people who are vaccinated, because everybody wants to be free of the restrictions. And everyone has a degree, sometimes a high degree, of COVID-19 fatigue, and we want to get back to normality, and vaccine is going to get us there.
Yeah, we tend to look at this through an American lens, understandably, in terms of infections and hospitalizations and those sorts of things. And comparatively, the U.S. appears to be doing rather well compared to a lot of other countries, including countries in Western Europe. Can you speak about India and these other countries that are struggling and what effect that has on all of us?
You know, that is such an important question, Lester. India is suffering terribly. You heard the announcement from Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, about the things that we're immediately going to be sending over to India, everything from oxygen to medications to PPEs to a variety of things that they may need for the production of vaccines. All of that is now in play. The issue is that's underlying all of this is that this is a global epidemic, and a global epidemic requires a global response. So not only for obvious humanitarian reasons and the moral obligations we have since we're a rich country, but also there's a self-interest here because you really want to get this virus controlled globally, because even if we will do a good job in getting our people vaccinated, as will the European Union and the UK and the developed nations, as long as there's a degree of viral dynamics anywhere in the world, there's always the threat of the emergence of variants from those places that might come back and obviate some of the things that we've done to protect ourselves. So we need to do it because we're a rich, generous nation that have extended ourselves historically. Look at what we did with HIV and the PEPFAR program in the developing nations. It's a historic demonstration of the generosity and the humanity of the American people. I think we can do the same sort of thing with SARS-CoV-2.
And you expressed a worry earlier about the number of daily infections, not excuse me, not down to where you think it should be. In terms of restrictions being lifted in many states and many communities, is there any chance of unringing that bell, or have, to the extent that things are being loosened up, have we missed the opportunity to tighten them up again if necessary?
Yeah, what's going to happen is that if you start seeing surges in places, you may have to re-tighten things. That's the reason why you've heard me say so many times, and I'm very sensitive to the people's needs to be free of these restrictions, that you don't want to declare victory prematurely, because if you pull back too early before you get enough people vaccinated, you're going to start seeing the kinds of things that we've seen in several states where you've seen resurgences of infections at a time when you really want to keep it under control. Again, the race is on, and every single day, the vaccine part of the race takes a step in the right direction by getting 3 million or so people vaccinated every day.
I want to ask you about therapeutics in a moment, but first, we're at 3 vaccines right now. Do you anticipate or see any other vaccines down the pike here that might be introduced into the system?
Oh, absolutely. Domestically and certainly globally. Well, we have AZ, which is now still being looked at, will soon, I hope, put forward their package to the FDA to get an emergency use authorization. We have Novavax, which is a different vaccine platform whose data in other countries looked at actually rather encouraging. I think that's going to be in play. We have another company, Sanofi, that's making another vaccine platform. So it's more than just the 3, Lester. There are candidates that are now in play getting ready to get enough data to be able to apply for an emergency use authorization.
And how are we looking in terms of vaccines for kids? I know Pfizer was in a trial for 12 to 15-year-olds. Do we see that coming down the pike soon?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the Pfizer trial in the 12 to 15-year-olds looks really good. I mean, it was like virtually 100% protection in the adolescents. So by the time we get to the fall term, I believe we'll be able to vaccinate high school students, which is really going to be an important step forward. With regard to younger children, we already have studies that are ongoing, which are called age de-escalation, which means that you want to make sure, since children are so vulnerable, and you want to make sure that you're giving them a product that you feel confident is safe and effective in the children. So you take children from 12 to 9, see if that's okay. Then you go from 9 to 6, from 6 to 2, and then 6 months to 2 years. So by the time we get to the end of this calendar year and the beginning of the first quarter of 2022, I believe we'll have enough information to be able to vaccinate children of any age.
I want to ask you about therapeutics. We haven't heard much about treatments in hospitals for those who are infected with COVID. What can you tell us about the progress of keeping people alive who end up in serious condition in hospitals?
Well, we've made some considerable progress in just the skill in taking care of people when you get enough experience. But also there have been some products approved by the FDA and others that have emergency use authorization. What we really do need now is a utilization early on of, for example, the monoclonal antibody combinations that are being underutilized because they require logistically intravenous administration. We've got to get that down to a sub-Q administration, give it to people early enough to keep them out of the hospital. The intermediate and longer range approach is to do targeted drug development of direct antivirals, very similar to the huge successes that we've had with antiretroviral drugs for HIV, which have really transformed the lives of HIV-infected individuals, and the transformation of the cure of hepatitis C. That was all done by targeted antiviral development. We have a couple of candidates that are right now early on in trial, looking encouraging, but the big investment and the big commitment is going to be to target the vulnerable part of the replication cycle of the virus so that we will have, when we get a very, very low level of infection, that we'll have drugs that when someone comes in with symptoms, we could give them a drug that's orally administered, that will not require them being in the hospital, but that will prevent them from requiring to go to the hospital. That, to my mind, is the goal of therapeutics.
And is there a recognition that COVID is going to be with us, even on a low level, and that we'll need those kinds of medicines, going forward?
I believe so, Lester, because when you have infectious diseases of this type, there are three possibilities. You can eradicate, you can eliminate, or you can control. I don't think there's a chance we're going to eradicate this. We've only in history eradicated one human virus, and that's smallpox. You can eliminate it in certain countries, the way we've done with polio here in the United States, the way we've done, for example, with measles, because we have very good herd immunity in measles. I think we're going to get very good control of it for a while. It may take a couple of years to really get it out of the picture, but I believe we're going to get it within this year, low enough to be able to really make some good strides towards normality. But as you're suggesting, there very well might be a low level in the community that's not threatening in the sense of a public health hazard, but individuals could be threatened by it, particularly susceptible individuals. And for those individuals, those are the ones you want to make sure when they do get infected, you have a therapy for them to prevent them from getting serious disease.
And lastly, I want to ask you about those who have already been infected and their antibodies. Do we know more about what protection those naturally produced antibodies are offering, and whether that would qualify or help us get on this road to herd immunity?
Well, great question. In general, when you are infected with a virus, you develop an immune response that for variable periods of time protect you. If you got infected with measles the way I did as a child, because it was before the measles vaccine, you're essentially protected for life. That doesn't appear to be the case with coronaviruses, so it's not going to be an indefinite protection. The one thing that's really interesting, Lester, that we found out, that usually natural infection induces a protection that's better than anything else you can do. But we're finding out that the vaccines are so good that they're inducing a level of protection that's even better than the protection that's induced by natural infection, which is really good news for vaccines.
Well, thank you for a terrific conversation, Dr. Fauci. Always appreciate hearing from you, and thank you for your work and that of all your colleagues on trying to get us through this and out of this. So we do appreciate it all.
Same here, Lester. Thank you for having me.
The pandemic has created a dangerous new normal of delaying preventative care. Kim Keck, CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, and Julie Rovner, Chief Washington Correspondent at Kaiser Health News, discuss the importance of getting back on track and how to make that happen.
Welcome, I'm Julie Rovner. I'm so happy to be here with Kim Keck. Before we get into it, Kim, why don't you give us the 30,000-foot view of what we're about to talk about?
Sure, Julie, it's great to be with you. So during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we know millions of people stayed home to flatten the curve, as we called it, right? And in doing so, they put off screenings, checkups, vaccinations, and elective surgeries.